Hello world, and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. I'm Blaze Stewart, architect at Winelect, and today we're going to be taking a look at Azure Sentinel. Hi guys, today we're going to take a look at Azure Sentinel and how it works, and we're going to be doing an overview of the project so you can get a sense of what it's for and how it works. So Azure Sentinel is represented by this graphic here, and I think it does a good job of encapsulating what you can do with Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel can do four basic things, and there's a couple ways to do these things within the context of Azure Sentinel. So the first thing it does is it collects data. So the data sources can be from something like a security appliance, or you can use Azure Log Analytics sources for that data source. So once you've got all the collection set up, you can then set up detection rules against that. Now, the detection rules can be rules that are more prescriptive in that you have rules and thresholds set. So you're basically querying the data, and when a certain threshold is exceeded, then you can do something in response to that, or you can use AI to detect anomalies and base it on patterns in the data and anomalous patterns that occur whenever something's going on in your environment. Now, regardless of which way you detect it, you can then use a set of tools to investigate incidents that happen in your environment. So investigating requires going into the data, querying the data, and looking for the patterns and where things happened in the data. So what you're doing here is trying to figure out where something might have happened, where it started, where it ended, and everything that happened in between. Now, the tools to do this can again be query languages, and you're just writing static queries against the data and trying to correlate it, or you can use AI models to help in that as well. So once you have some investigations done, you can also do responses to this. So this can be automatic, done based on something that you detect, or it can be done based on some things that you do in response to it as well that are more manual. But the way this works is through logic apps. So it gives you the ability to trigger something in logic apps through a logic app playbook, and that can then invoke a response such as shut down a VM or send alerts or any number of things that you can automate with a logic app. So there are tons of things you can go into that. But the core of what Azure Sentinel does is collect data, detect anomalies, and then gives you the tools to figure out where things happen. And then you can also give you some responses. But these three are right here that are going to be the main thing that are happening in the context of Azure Sentinel, while you can invoke external systems by way of connectors from Azure Sentinel to invoke automation in response to these things. I'm here in the Azure portal, and you can see that I have Azure Sentinel right here, but if you can't find it, just type in Sentinel up here in the search bar and click on Azure Sentinel, and that'll take you to Azure Sentinel. Now, if you don't have any workspaces set up, you'll be asked to set one up, but I already have one, so I'm going to click on this, and this is going to pull up the dashboard for this workspace. Now, this particular Azure Sentinel is collecting a bunch of data from a couple of machines that I have around me, and this mostly is coming from my firewall logs, which are on my firewall, which is sitting behind me on a shelf, and it's just streaming the data back up into Sentinel. Now, the overview just gives me events that have happened and potential malicious threats. I haven't really detected anything because I haven't really spent a lot of time setting up rules for this. But to set up rules and things like that, you can do it under news and guides right here. You can look at what's new, or go to what's getting started, collect data, create security alerts, etc., and do some automation, walk through a wizard like this. Or you can come down here, configure, and do much of the same kinds of things under here. I'm going to use the configuration down here and just look at what I've already set up. So to get data connected, you need to come down here to data connectors, and you can choose one of many existing data connectors, and there's a number of them here. There's 97 connectors, and it'll allow you to import data from those and into Azure Sentinel. If you don't have that already, you can use your Log Analytics workspace tables for that data source as well, which is what I did. And so what I've done is I've set up rules around that using my data out of my firewall, which is coming in through a syslog table in Azure Log Analytics workspace. So if I wanted to set up a rule, you could come over here, hit create, or you can edit an existing rule, which is what I'm going to do here. Now, the workflow is going to look the same, but it just basically allows you to set up the logic for it. This is the name of the firewall rule, and it's just the status and so on. And you set severity between low, medium, high. The tactics, you can set which tactics you're trying to look for whenever you're trying to correlate data and that kind of thing. And then you set the logic right here. Now, this logic rule is based on the custom query language. And what you're trying to get into this particular query is something that you can use to map some entities down here. So what really Sentinel is doing behind the scenes is it's taking fields from multiple data sources and trying to map those onto a set of common fields. So so you can pick things like you can have things like account or Azure resource or DNS or file, whatever it might be, and you can add a new entity, and I could pick maybe an account, and if I wanted to map that onto another value, I could set what's the identity. I could use SID or something like that, and I could map that onto maybe my session ID or something, and that's going to give me something to correlate on. And I could choose another entity here: IP, host name, file hash, whatever it might be, registry key, process, any number of those, and you could then map other data like that. And so once you have your data mapped, this serves as a way to correlate data. So I have two different IP addresses that I can track. I can also add in other things like email addresses if I had those available, if I mail messages, mailboxes, and see here mailbox risk level UPN, those kinds of things. It's just a class and then a kind of data that I can map in this. And I'm mapping two IP addresses and then a sense of SID with my session ID for the data coming out of my firewall logs. Now, once this is done, I can have created incident alerts from trigger, and that's enabled. And then I can say group alerts, and that's enabled. Up to 150 grouped can be grouped for a single incident. So basically, what that does is keeps it from spamming you if there is an incident in your environment, and limit the group alerts to 5 hours and so on. And then you can do that based on that. So that's just basically going to set up some alerts if I want to do that. And then if I wanted to automate this, what I could do behind the scenes is go and set up an Azure playbook. And a playbook and with logic apps would allow me to do some logic that would be triggered by one of these. And that could be done by a logic app, which is kind of outside the scope of what I'm trying to build here. But once you have that all set up, you can save this or validate it, save it, and then simply save the rule. So what that's basically going to do is run a query every 5 minutes. That's going to look for a couple of conditions in my firewall logs that are looking for some anomalies in the various syslog data that's coming out of that. I'm basically looking for geo-blocked rules by that particular query there. But I could have other ones if I wanted to spend the time and do that. So once you have that set up, you can move on to other things, which you're going to look under here with threat management. Now, after I have connected my data sources with data connectors or through Log Analytics Workspace, and I've set up some analytics there to gather data and set up alerting and possible mitigations for some real-time protection, I can also use threat management right here to do research within the context of my Sentinel configuration. Now, if I had incidents that were active in this context, I would see those show up here, and I would see those working in those based on any kind of rules that I might have set up or something like that. Now, if I go to the last 30 days, I do have some here. This is what it would look like. And this is basically a rule that I had originally set up that had a firewall rule and sending alerts out. So these are just basically some rules I had set up a few days ago that was sending out rules. So based on a rule that I had set up, I changed the rule so it wasn't being so chatty with me, but it does give me an alert. And this is where you can see things that were going on inside of your environment. So it might look like this. Now, if you wanted to do some research into that, there's a couple ways to do that. You have workbooks, and workbooks are basically ways of querying different kinds of workloads here. You can see that there are several here. And if I wanted to add a workbook, you can come over here into this workbook configuration wizard, and it would basically walk you through that. But it's going to give you more, something that's more query based. And what that's going to let you do is set up some queries inside of the workbook to collate data and see reports and that kind of thing, so that you can kind of see what's going on there. Now, also what you can do is set up notebooks. Now, notebooks are AI based. So while these are more based on queries, this is going to be based on AI where you can build models. And there's a couple of templates here that allow you to create models that can be used for finding patterns in your data based on machine learning algorithms. And these are integrated from your data. And so you can set up different data from that and then use this to try to find various kinds of things in your data that wouldn't be so obvious through just querying the data. So this is looking for patterns and clusters and trying to organize data. It's based on AI, so it's not as deterministic as something like a query would be, but it can also find insights in your data that you might not be able to find just through standard queries, and it's going to find patterns and correlations that might not be just obvious whenever you're looking at your data. But beyond that, you have this hunting tool, which is useful for just doing queries in your data. And so if you don't want to build these kind of more robust workbooks or these notebooks here, you can run hunting. And this allows us to run things that are basically going to look for the kinds of tactics, as they're called, that were used for threats. And so if I wanted to look at various kinds of hunting queries, I can choose one of these pre-built ones right here that are based on DNS or things like that, or I can do a new query right here. And what this is going to, I can paste one in. I think I have one in my memory here, and this is going to allow me to basically map columns right here that if I wanted to, I can map account data. I can got the option to do an IP address, and I think I don't have any timestamp on this. If I wanted to put a timestamp on this, I guess I could, and that would give me time data and things to correlate with. And so this allows me to have those basic pieces of information, and like the alerts that I was setting up when I was setting up the other things, I can set up these kinds of tactics that it's going to be looking for discovery, like pre-attack impacts, exfiltration of data, collections, discovery, credential access, and looking for these kinds of things according to the query that I have here. And then I could create this custom query, and it's going to give me back different kinds of data that I might be looking for. And if I just called it my hunting, it would give me a report back on that. I'm not really going to find anything with this. I'm not expecting to, because there's nothing in my data set here that's really going to give me that's going to give me anything that's going to be very useful. I already set one up here, and this, it's not going to find anything. It's just doing some analysis of that data and looking for anomalies, etc., on what it's monitoring and many other things like that. So it's giving me some automation around that. So that's what this is good for, and you can use this to expedite some of the kinds of things that you might require correlating data across multiple data sources. This is going to be able to do that for you more automatically by using some of those mappings that we saw. So again, those are the kinds of things that you can do for threat management. So all in all, this tool does give me a lot of options for doing a lot of different kinds of detections from a lot of different sources, but also a lot of different options for managing threats as they come through. What you have to realize with something like a SIEM, though, is that not everything it detects is necessarily a bad, is going to be a threat. So this thing did actually come back with some results right there. And that's kind of interesting that it found that. And so it did have some results that came back from this hunting expedition that it went on. In any case, what you can see here is that you have the ability to collect a lot of different data from different data sources and different ways to mitigate and monitor that data, and then look for threats as they emerge. Now, this is not a deterministic tool, so not everything is going to be a positive result like you might get with a more deterministic tool, like what you would get with Azure Security Center, which is going to be more based on signatures and known threats. This is looking for patterns and anomalies and basically heuristics based approaches to threat management. And so it's looking for patterns and that kind of threat. It's looking for like some unknown threat, for something that you might not be able to identify with more of those more deterministic methods, such as signature-based approaches like we'd see with like antivirus and so on. So very cool tool. I would like to see where it goes. But so over the next few videos, I'm going to be doing some more not so much looking at Sentinel, but looking at Azure Sentinel and log analytics, and looking at the custom query language, and because I think it's going to be very useful for using this tool and log analytics and Azure Monitor as ways to get a better handle on monitoring in Azure. If you like this content, please consider visiting us online at www.wintellect.com, and there you can find about services that Wintellect offers, including training and consulting services. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to get notifications when new content becomes available, and also comment down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheOneMule, and also follow Wintellect on Twitter at WintellectNow or at Wintellect. We are constantly posting things about Azure-related technologies and things related to software development. You can also reach us by email at consulting@wintellect.com. Until next time, thank you.